the DNR Recreational Safety Section Chief, joining us. We'll have plenty of time for questions at the end, and I'm going to ask that you stay muted and hold your questions until that time. So with that, I will turn things over to Eric this morning.
Great. Hey, thanks a lot, Dana. As Dana mentioned, my name is Eric Loebner. I'm the director of the Wisconsin DNR's Wildlife Management Program, and just really excited to be here today to just give a really high-level overview of some of the great things associated with the 9-day gun deer season, and then I'll hand it off to Jeff to get into the nitty-gritty details of the season and the harvest numbers. But what a great opportunity to get outdoors the 9-day gun deer season offers. It's a great time to develop new adventures, to enhance those long-term friendships and relationships, as well as building new friendships. I had a unique opportunity this year where I had an opportunity to hunt with some people that I hadn't hunted in the past, and it was just a great opportunity. But in addition to that, you know, it's also a great opportunity for many people to put a very lean, good tasting protein source on their table. You know, as we've talked in the past, the venison donation program continues to be a pillar of how hunters are working to give back to their communities through the donation program. We had over 100,000 deer that have been donated to the food pantries since the program began. This last year, although our numbers are not final as of yet, we're expecting anywhere around 1,200 deer to be donated to the program. Last year, you know, we had right around 1,370 deer that were donated to the program. So we have been seeing a little bit of a decline in that over the years. It's been a bit of a challenge with some of our meat processors and the number of meat processors that we have working in the program. But nonetheless, it's been a great program that has been well received across the state. You know, you can't talk about the 9-day gun deer season without also talking about the ecological value that hunting provides in many ways, shapes, and forms. Not only is this a great opportunity to help manage a deer population that can at times in certain areas have a bit of a negative impact on some of the habitat that's out there, but it also is a great economic driver from the standpoint of the money that it provides not only to the communities across the state, but also to conservation efforts within Wisconsin. Talking about that economic value, just real quickly, this year we had all 50 states, again, represented in the individuals coming from all 50 states, as well as 21 foreign countries. Put that into perspective, you know, that's quite incredible when you think about 21 countries sending individuals here on their own accord, obviously, to come to Wisconsin to go deer hunting. We had people from as far away as New Zealand, Chad, and South Africa. And certainly, as usual, Minnesota, Michigan, and Illinois, as far as states, captured the top 3 states with the most hunters come to Wisconsin for our gun deer season. Overall, by the end of the season, you know, as expected, license sales were down a little bit to 1.6% decrease. However, we did experience a slight increase in our conservation patron license sales. Both the resident and non-resident conservation license sales were up just a little bit this year, but essentially we're back to the pre-pandemic license sales levels that we saw back in 2019. You know, I think when you put the perspective of the economic driver of hunting here in Wisconsin, I wanted to draw everybody's attention to the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service National Survey of Fishing, Hunting, and Wildlife Associated Recreation, which indicates that hunters spend right around $2 billion on hunting here in Wisconsin. 26% of those costs are coming from trip-related expenses. So things like buying food at restaurants, grocery stores, or lodging, transportation. 50% of those costs come from equipment purchases, you know, both secondarily as well as directly related to their hunting activities. You know, that could be things like guns and ammunition, tree stands. Those are the direct acquisitions, but also secondarily, you know, tents or special clothing, those things that they buy that can also be used for other activities. They buy them predominantly for hunting, but they also use them for other activities. And then lastly, about 25% of those that revenue comes from, you know, other expenditures such as license sales, membership dues to conservation organizations, different magazines, let's say associated with hunting and that sort of thing. On average, big game hunters spend about $304 per hunter per trip. So when you think about that, with just right around, you know, 600,000 gun deer hunters specifically coming to Wisconsin, throw in the number of bow hunters, that dollar adds up quickly. Not only do these expenditures, as I mentioned earlier, have a significant impact on our local economies across the state, but they're also a huge driver in the conservation dollars. That money is then used, those license sales dollars are then used to benefit a wide variety of game species here in Wisconsin. So with that, I'm going to hand it off to Jeff, and he'll walk us through some additional information on the specifics of the 9-day gun deer season harvest.
Yeah, thank you, Eric, and good morning, everybody. And thanks again for being here this morning and providing the coverage on the deer season that we know a lot of Wisconsinites are strongly connected to. My name is Jeff Pritzel. I'm the State Deer Program Specialist, and thus tracking what's been going on over the course of the 9-day season. And so we've got all the harvest information in. Hunters had until 5 p.m. yesterday to register their deer through the 9-day season. So that's why numbers are available this morning. And the preliminary total that we're at right now for the 9-day gun season is 203,295 total deer. These numbers will be available in the press release as well. So if you want to write them down or pull it off of here later, that's great. But broken down, the buck harvest for the 9-day was 98,397. The antlerless deer harvest was 104,898. So basically the trend we saw on opening weekend and the pace we had opening weekend of it outpacing 2021 persisted throughout the 9-day season. And so our total harvest is up from last year 14.4%, pretty similar for bucks and antlerless deer. But we're also 8% above the 5-year average for 9-day gun deer season. So a number of variables contribute to that. Overall, the hunting conditions were good. Certainly the snow on the ground through opening weekend, which persisted into the week, helped as well. And we didn't have any real major negative weather events other than maybe that high wind that we talked about opening weekend. So that, along with other variables, most things were pointed in the right direction for the hunters. One thing that came up as note was that the standing corn, the corn harvest, statewide, it was right on the average going into the season at about 75% picked, but it was very spotty across the state. And that seemed to be driven by either room at the mills or the cost of drying the corn down. And so some areas, corn harvest was over 90% complete, which was great for the deer hunters. And other areas, it may have been perceived that there was a fair amount standing locally, and that was the case. But there were combines in action during the season, and the corn was coming off. So again, in general, everything was pointing in the right direction. Earlier opener, we had a mild winter last year. There may have been a little carryover as we talked about the 2021 season, was just suppressed a little bit for a number of reasons. And so maybe we picked some of that up as carryover this year. But in general, good news as far as the gun deer season goes. The forest zones, the state is divided up into 4 major deer management zones. And the 2 forest zones, the northern forest and the central forest, saw the biggest increases relative to last year. And that probably makes sense just because of the weather conditions that we're talking about. They maybe a little bit more buffered from that strong wind on opening day because of the cover on the landscape. And the snow cover probably persisted a little longer in those forested landscapes as well. So that makes sense. The central forest was 30% ahead of last year's 9-day gun season, and the northern forest was 20% ahead of last year's season. So that was great to see. The farmland zones also ahead, but not as much. So that's where we're at for the harvest for the 9-day. Of course, at this point, we still look forward because there are plenty of firearm deer harvest opportunities still on the calendar through the month of December. Based on last year's harvest, I'm anticipating we'll probably see another 25,000 deer or so harvested between now and the end of the year with the additional opportunities that are still out there. And permits are still available for those that maybe want to come in, and or depending on how things went for them in the 9-day season, antlerless permits in certain deer management units continue to be available. We have a web page that's dedicated to tracking the availability of antlerless bonus permits. And so hunters can go there to see if they want to pick up another permit for another part of the state, something like that. One of the things that often gets shared as a matter of just tracking the statistics by deer management unit or by county is that media sources will sometimes just list the call it top performing counties in each part of the state. And if you do that with just the raw numbers we provide, which is the way most people do it, that doesn't account for the different sizes of the county. So for example, in raw numbers, Marathon County will show up as the leading county in terms of harvest, but that's by virtue of the fact that Marathon County is the largest county in the state. So if we look at the deer management units, which are for the most part counties, by the number of animals that are harvested per square mile, it breaks out a little bit differently. And so I'll just share that in the Northern Forest, the top 3 counties were Taylor, followed by Washburn, followed by Burnett. And in the Central Forest, it was the Eau Claire County portion of the Central Forest that led, followed by the Adams portion and the Clark County portion. All of the Central Forest counties are subdivided between a farmland and a forest land unit. In the central farmland, and this leads the entire state, Adams County, their farmland portion was the highest, followed by Marquette and Wapaka. And in the southern farmlands, it was Vernon County leading, followed by Richland and Crawford County. And so with that, I will turn it over to April, and I'll look forward to your questions afterwards. Thanks.
Thanks, Jeff, and good morning, everybody. I'm here just to really report out and provide an update reference to our hunting incidents that we had throughout the state during this 9-day gun deer season. So we closed out the season with 8 hunting incidents, 1 being a fatal, and then 7 injury incidents. And if you recall, 6 of those occurred during opening weekend. The 2 that we had towards the close, that Friday and Saturday, we had one that involved an injury incident, a 2-party incident where a 36-year-old male was the victim of a gunshot wound to the leg, where he was hunting in a ground blind on private property adjacent to public property when a group of hunters were conducting a deer drive on the public side, and shot at 2 running deer, and through that investigation, a 51-year-old male was identified as the responsible shooter in that case. And again, it's a pending investigation, injury incident, and continue to work through that. And then on Saturday in Sauk County, we had a 27-year-old male who suffered a self-inflicted gunshot wound to the leg based on a unwanted discharge of his firearm. Again, that was an injury incident. So when you look at these 8 incidents, 4 of them were self-inflicted. 3 involved 2-party incidents, or 2 people involved from the same hunting party. And then 1 involved the 2-party with separate hunting parties. Looking at just some of the demographics through the 9-day, the average responsible shooter age is 28, and the average victim age is 30. And we'll continue to assess these demographics and kind of learn from them and work from them as we close out 2022. As mentioned before, we have a number of hunting seasons currently either taking place or will be taking place here in December. So again, we'll wait to close out 2022 before we really jump into some of that statistical data with our hunting incidents overall from the year. Hunting continues to be safe in Wisconsin. When you look at just the past 10 9-day gun deer seasons, so from 2013 to 2022, The incident trend reflects 6.4 hunting incidents per year. And in addition, Wisconsin has had 6 fatal-free seasons in the past 10 years. And also in the past 10 years, we are, working with, these single-digit incidents that we continue to try to learn from and address any issues that we see that we can work towards in following seasons. One thing that I want to really communicate out is we want our folks to continue to hunt safe, hunt smart, because we do have a number of hunting seasons still taking place, whether it's the muzzleloader season, we have statewide antlerless seasons, the antlerless holiday hunt, a number of those seasons. So importance to keep the 4 rules of firearm safety on the forefront of our minds. Very important to remember that acronym TABK, that being treat every firearm as if it's loaded, always point the muzzle in a safe direction, be certain of your target, what's before it and what's beyond it, and then keeping that finger outside the trigger guard until it's safe to shoot. Just very important, following these 4 rules of firearm safety aids to, our folks being safe, being successful, and getting back home to their families. So if it's 4 rules, if that seems to be something where it's like, what was that again? The important part is controlling that muzzle, right? Always knowing where that muzzle's pointed. So even in a situation where if you'd have an unwanted discharge, that muzzle's being pointed in a safe direction to prevent hopefully any injury or damages, those type of things. Again, just reflecting back on our hunting season and the gun deer season, and the trend that we have in the single-digit numbers. Just want to do a shout out and just really credit our volunteer instructors for the work that they've done through the course of 2022. With our instructors, we couldn't have done this without them. They've put on and conducted just over 600 in-person courses throughout the course of the year, and that continues to contribute to our safe hunting seasons. And I think I will hand it back off to Dana.
All right, April, thank you. Okay, everyone, we do have time for questions now this morning. Just reminder that we want to be respectful of everyone's time, so please listen to make sure that we're not duplicating any questions. But go ahead and raise your hand. You can either do it via the little reaction emojis or in the chat. We'll keep an eye in there. But if you raise your hand, I'll call on you each individually, and then you can unmute and ask your question. A friendly reminder also, since I know this is recorded, a lot of folks watch it later. If you do have your questions popping up later, you can always send us an email, dnrpress@wisconsin.gov, and we will get that right over to you as quickly as possible. Adrian, go ahead and unmute.
Is that Adrian or Adriana? Sorry.
Adriana, go ahead.
Okay, good. I wanted to make sure it wasn't someone else. Did we see, off speculation, did we see more people hunting this year because of rising food costs? Is that at all playing into why we are seeing such a successful hunt this year?
That's an interesting question. I'll start it out and then I'll hand it to Jeff. Yeah, we can't really speculate, what drives people out hunting. I can tell you, being a hunter, that when I looked out the window the week before the season and I saw the white snow coming down, that's a driver that's going to encourage me if I'm kind of riding the fence, which I'll be honest, I'm never really riding the fence about buying a license because I'm always out there. But for those that may be, right, it could really drive them in a direction of, I'm going to focus and get out there. Recognize, our license sales were down a little bit, which we've been expecting. We've been projecting that for the last 10 years or so, as we've been seeing people age out of hunting as they get older. More mobility restrictions make it more challenging. We've been seeing fewer and fewer people out there. So we actually sold fewer licenses than last year, but our harvest was up. So likely that was driven by the great conditions that we had, although cold. The snow really helps visibility, and in certain areas, there probably is maybe more deer that are out there available for harvest. But Jeff, anything that you wanted to add to that?
Yeah, thanks, Eric. And as Eric suggested, and as we talked about earlier, there's probably a half a dozen different variables that are driving any individual hunter's decisions, whether to go and then whether to harvest a deer or not. And we did see this trend in especially increased antlerless harvest has been carrying through the entire season, beginning with the archery season. To the degree that it's influenced by economic factors and meat prices this year, that there's probably some play in there, but also we saw this dip back in 2021, which I think was in response to a strong antlerless harvest in 2020. I suspect people went into the 2021 season perhaps with some venison in the freezer from the previous year and maybe a little bit less incentive. And now they've gone through that and they're entering the 2022 season with space in the freezer, considering the meat prices. Yeah, that's probably just, but it's a sliver of maybe 6 different variables that maybe played into why we saw a higher increase harvest this year.
Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you, guys. Todd, go ahead and unmute.
Hi there. It's been a couple of years now since you've gone to online registration. Does DNR have any ideas or estimates on how many people are just not registering their deer and how many they're taking off the landscape this year or in years past? Are you factoring that into population estimates, and just what does it look like in terms of people that just aren't registering their deer?
Yeah, thanks, Todd, for that question. We do have a net mechanism for where we track to create a compliance estimate for our registration. We knew even under the prior system that there was a certain proportion of non-compliance. And so ways of going about tracking our harvest registration trends kind of give us an indication of how that's playing out. And what we do, we've done this for decades, and it's served us well. Just as a general reference, when we get to the end of all harvests, we add 15% to that total to use the numbers that generate our population estimates. And that 15% added on is to cover non-registered deer and other potential ways that a unrecovered deer. So that just recognizing that it does happen, but to the degree that that's changing over time, we attempt to track that to stay on top of it. But in general, because we've had this culture in Wisconsin for decades that registering your deer is mandatory, and most hunters recognize that that's their contribution to stewardship of the resource and making sure we're making good decisions down the road. So there's always going to be that sliver, that portion that aren't going to show up. But our registration, when we are monitoring it, it's usually in that 85 to 90% compliance. And relative to our neighboring states where we kind of talk about this information, we do quite well in Wisconsin.
All right, Jeff, thank you. Crystal, you're up next. Go ahead and unmute.
I was just curious, is there anything you guys are noticing when it comes to CWD, whether it be higher or lower numbers, maybe compared to last year or a couple of years? Or is there anything new you guys are learning from this?
So I'll just touch on CWD. Certainly our CWD processing center has been running fast and furious, really working hard to process those samples and the heads that come into our center as quickly as we possibly can to get that testing turnaround time reduced as much as feasibly possible. So we did have a CWD positive facility in Lincoln County that was announced by the Department of Ag, Trade, and Consumer Protection on Friday before the gun deer season. We also had during the season, now we've had a positive comeback in Kenosha County, which Kenosha is one of those interesting counties in a way that we had our last positive there was in 2003. And so there have been a number of years since we had actually picked up another positive down there, but we have gotten that. Certainly, we learn something new from CWD, I'll say almost every day, right? We've got a number of different research projects that we're working on right now in conjunction with the U.S. Department of Ag across the state, looking at CWD and its impacts. We're working on the final analysis for the Southwest deer CWD and predator study that we had going on down in the parts of Grant and Iowa counties and part of Dane, I think, as well. But certainly working on that project. Great information is coming out on that on a regular basis. I know we do regular report outs on that. I believe they're posted on our website, would be available there as well. But we've been working on a study regarding composting of deer to evaluate the ability to neutralize the prion. And so that study is ongoing in conjunction with UW-Madison, as well as a couple of other projects that we have going on here in the state. So, Crystal, I'll just say we're always learning something new. We haven't gotten many of our CWD's test results back from the season yet. It'll take us anywhere from, I'll say 9 to 14 days to get those all processed. I know I myself am going to be out there at the CWD Processing Center on later this week, Thursday, Friday of this week, to try to move the last of the samples through.
Eric, thank you. Adam, go ahead and unmute.
Yeah, thanks everyone for doing this. Just wondering about safety as we continue out for the rest of the year. I know we're supposed to be focusing on the 9-day hunt, but if you'll entertain a question, I had a concerned viewer about, he was out in the woods and had someone with a brown jacket and a white hat walk by his stand. And I know there's going to be a number of hunts for the rest of the year. And I'm just wondering if there's a reminder or resources for the general public who might be in the woods, anything that you can share there to hopefully help keep people safe.
From our perspective, we will continue to educate folks that we have these various different hunting seasons taking place. We have some messaging. I don't know, Dana might be able to kind of see what that's forecasted, but we do continue to educate our public of these hunting seasons. We encourage folks to wear bright colored clothing, so that they're easily seen. But yes, we definitely realize that with hunting seasons, we have other recreational activities that take place, whether it's hiking, bird watching, those type of things, even biking in some situations. So just knowing and being aware of all the different activities that, in Wisconsin, that we can all have going on all at the same time, right?
Yeah, Adam, I'll add to what April just said too. We manage a significant amount of public land, and I think it's always important. Hunting is generally a very safe activity. However, as public land users, when there is an active hunting season ongoing, gun deer season in particular, we strongly encourage people to wear some sort of bright colors, just to increase their visibility. Nobody wants an accident to happen. And so it's always best to take some extra precautions if you're out there on the property hiking or bird watching, whatever. Always consider wearing brighter clothing just to make yourself increase your visibility and really work hard to reduce any additional accidents.
Perfect. I think April and Eric just nailed it. At the end of the day, our public lands are for everyone, and we want everyone to feel safe and open and have those lands feel accessible to everyone. One more quick question that was actually dropped in the chat by Matt. Do we have any guidance for hunters that forget to register their deer by 5 p.m. the following day? Should they be encouraged to register it, or will they be cited for non-compliance? And is there any sort of grace period along with that?
Sure, I'll take it first, and if April has a follow-up, but the short answer is there is not a grace period that's established, but the guidance would be absolutely register your deer. As an example, the numbers we're sharing today, we specifically describe them as preliminary, because history has shown us that we will probably add a couple thousand deer over the next month to this total from folks that discover or realize, or whatever the case, they had issues last week with a connection. And bottom line is, we want the deer registered. There is not a red flag that will pop up that, oh, this deer got registered and it was past that 5 p.m. deadline. The issue a hunter wants to avoid is that, should they find themselves in a situation down the road where they're being investigated for something else, and it becomes apparent, we become aware that there was an unregistered animal, now that hunter has an issue. So, we recognize that on a rare occurrence, it's either overlooked or there was connection issues. And so doing it by 5 p.m. is the law. It allows us to provide this information to you all in a very timely manner, and then make management decisions off of that. But if someone hasn't registered their animal, absolutely the guidance is to go ahead and register it.
That's correct. And, as far as, doing the right thing, calling it in, whether that's using the hotline or the call center, getting in contact, with your local warden, and just, being able to have that platform to explain, and knowing that, yes, mistake was made, but making to look it right. And again, making sure, that we get that deer registered is important.
All right, April and Jeff, thank you. We'll give it just a few more seconds to see if any other hands pop up. A quick note, if anyone didn't see it in the chat, the detailed harvest information should be available on the webpage now. If you refresh it, that information has been updated, but you will have to click refresh to get that to load. If you do have any questions that pop up later in the day, you can always shoot us an email, dnrpress@wisconsin.gov, and we will make sure that question gets sent out and answered promptly. Paul Smith, go ahead, unmute. Paul, I see your hands raised. Go ahead and unmute.
Yeah, thank you, Dana. For anybody, I was looking at the CWD samples submitted so far, and the number is substantially lower than it's been in the last several years. Can you comment on that? Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Paul. So what we scan in the data and enter the data sheet that's associated with the sample. So the sample will be processed based on that number, but we don't actually update the information online until we actually enter the data into the system and then verify that location. So there's a bit of a lag. We'll see definitely a tremendous jump in that number as we're continuing to work on samples. I don't know right now off the top of my head where we're at, but I know when I was in there on Tuesday, last week Tuesday, we were not able to process all of the samples that we received. So we were working to try and keep them moving. So there's samples coming in. It's just not, there's just a lag in the system.
Awesome, Eric, thank you. All right, I don't see any more hands popping up, and it is 11:35 right now. So with that, I think we will wrap things up for this morning. Again, any questions, send us an email later on, dnrpress@wisconsin.gov, and we will make sure that it gets sent out to the appropriate parties and get that answer back to y'all as soon as possible. So with that, thank you so much for joining us this morning, and enjoy the rest of your Tuesday.